All right, we should be live. I assume everyone can hear me. Bent,
Hello.
can you hear Bent? Let's make a check.
Hello,
Assume
everybody.
everyone can hear me. Bent,
Hello.
can you hear Bent? Let's make a check. You seem a bit quiet, Bent. I might have to turn you up a little bit.
Yeah.
Give me a second. You seem a bit quiet, Bent. I might have to.
All right. Testing, testing.
Okay. Okay. All right. So we are watching Kent Hovind and emotionally stunted Moticon debate the flood. We are watching. This should be pretty good, hopefully. And if levels are bad, actually, you know what? I'm just going to enhance. Yeah, there we go. Maybe that isn't it. Enhancements. Come on. XP quiet mode. Whatever. We're just gonna. Oops. Here we go.
All right, so let me just get this up. I don't have a screen share, so I'll just be reading for most of it. All right, so let me just get this up. All right. I'll just be reading. Okay, so if you'd like, you can start the timer. Um, so originally I planned to discuss or argue Caribbean geology and how it doesn't fit with a young Earth global flood model. For example, like the formation and the evolution of the Caribbean islands, some of the major geological
This guy's
features found
Caribbean,
there,
in case
the
that wasn't obvious.
biogeography and the native peoples, etc., or even the plate tectonics of the Caribbean. Um, but then I realized that creationists don't even attempt to explain the formation of the Caribbean themselves and how it fit within their narrative. To me, it seems like if they like the Caribbean doesn't exist. Let's take this is one island, for example, Barbados. It's a volcanic island, 166 square miles, where 80% of it is covered in limestone, ranging from anywhere between 25 to 40 meters thick. However, this limestone is most times situated hundreds of feet above sea level. For example, the Harrison's Cave is located some 700 feet above sea level. So the question would be, when and where was this island formed? And where does its formation fit within the flood model?
I've never heard any creationist ever attempt to address that.
Since limestone is formed in the sea, when was it formed in relation to the formation of the island? And when and how did the limestone reach hundreds of feet above sea level in relation to the Caribbean and all the other islands? So what was actually going on in the Caribbean um, in a young Earth model? Um, we also have to take into consideration that creations like Standing for Truth and Raw Matt argue that Pangea was a thing, so the Caribbean couldn't have been pre-flood; it had to have been post-flood. But I know Kent Hovind doesn't accept Pangea, so it'd be nice for them to argue on that.
I'm not sure that
Um,
follows, but okay.
so basically, I
This
want
guy's
to know
confusing me.
what actually going on in the Caribbean. Is the Caribbean pre-flood or post-flood? How did the Caribbean form and evolve over time under a young Earth model? And I mean, the complete lack of explanation for an entire region of the planet
20
says a
bucks
lot
says
about the
Kent
lack of
doesn't
explanatory
answer
power
those
of the
questions.
creationist model.
I'm not
For
taking that
example, there
bet.
were actually Amerindians living in the Caribbean some 4 to 5 thousand years ago. Where do they fit within everything else? So instead of discussing things that would sound like a foreign language to creationists, why not discuss things that creationists think they could explain? Like, for example, the arrangement of fossils in the fossil record. When creationists argue about the arrangement of fossils in the fossil record, they argue that marine life would generally be buried first, like shelly animals and so on, and then land animals and lighter animals like birds and so on, or they would be buried by ecosystems or by mobility or by density or a combination of those previously mentioned. But creationists usually start with life at the Cambrian. They completely ignore prior eras like the Proterozoic and the Archean, etc., that represented the first 3.5 billion years of Earth's history that only consist of microbes. How was hydrologic sorting working there with those layers? Even though they start from the Cambrian, let's say they ignore the previous layers, creationists fail to explain the complete lack of major groups that you should find there. Like, for example, you never find any bony fish, no true crabs, or no crabs, no sharks, no marine mammals, no marine reptiles, and no coral reefs. All the things you should expect to find in a marine environment if all these forms existed at the same time. And the interesting thing about this is the Cambrian isn't just a deep sea environment, as creationists would like you to believe. The Cambrian was an era in Earth's history, a very complex environment, and consisted of many.
Now, I'm going to point out that is very true. A lot of the more interesting Cambrian fossil-bearing strata are shallow water. For instance, as I'm sure Bent knows, the Bright Angel Formation involves a lot of shallow water sediments. Right, Bent?
Of course. Of course I know that.
You know, we went and saw the Bright Angel Formation not that long ago.
Of course we did.
It's in the Grand Canyon.
Of course it is.
All right.
Different geological features like it had continents in the Cambrian, islands and mountains and rivers and so on, even deserts in the Cambrian. So we should actually expect to find at least some land animals or plants, etc. there. So the creation's objection to...
Oh, wait. As we always do, we forgot. What are we drinking? Bent?
Well, I am drinking what they call tap water with ice made in my very own freezer.
You're saying tap water on the rocks?
On the rocks.
And what year was this tap water bottled?
It was bottled in Never, which was one of my favorite years. It's, I think, the year that Kent Hovind's going to win a debate.
I think he means the year where Kent Hovind got his PhD.
Oh, that's what did I say? I think that's what I meant.
Yeah, because actually I've seen Kent Hovind win debates against people who are even worse than he is.
Yeah, but I'm predicting that won't happen at all in the future. Until the year Never.
I mean, he did pretty well in the GE debate, but I am drinking Knob Creek Kentucky Straight Bourbon 100 proof. So it's 50% alc divided by volume. So take that, volume. All right, continuing on.
Why, for example, we don't find any cows in the Cambrian isn't a valid one, since there were plenty land in the Cambrian era too, for which there is no trace of any land animals or plants to be found. Stratigraphied mountain ranges. Usually creationists would argue that mountain ranges are formed when tectonic plates buckle. However, they have no explanation for why you find stratigraphied mountain ranges between divergent plates. For example, the Appalachian or Appalachian mountain range located on the eastern side of North America between the North American plate and the African and Eurasian plate. But if mountains are formed by the buckling of tectonic plates, as mentioned, how do you get a stratigraphied mountain range between divergent plates, especially if you don't accept that Pangea was a thing? What mechanisms cause this mountain range to buckle up like that? And why does the strata and fossil fauna of the mountain range correlate with those found in East Africa and East Europe as predicted by uniformitarianism?
That's actually a really good
These
question.
things need to be explained if you need others to take you seriously with your model. The things the flood seem to preserve compared to what it doesn't. One thing that stands out about this flood is that the type of things it preserve compared to what it doesn't. This violent deluge was able to crack the crust of the earth like an eggshell and reshape the face of the planet, was delicate enough to preserve things like raindrops, overlapping trackways, animal burrows, and fully formed egg nests. And mind you, you find these things sandwiched between layers laid down by the same flood. How do you get these things, in particular the egg nests, to be sandwiched between layers laid down by the same flood? Curiously though, the flood was able to preserve these delicate things, but never any pre-flood man-made structures or buildings or civilizations, for if we do find them, they would be sitting hundreds of feet below flood sediments. Fossilized coral reefs, another problem for the flood. Fossilized coral reefs and where they're found let me see. Right. So I briefly mentioned that there are no coral reefs in the Cambrian or before it, as it should be expected under creationist burial by mobility argument, since coral reefs don't move. Um, Instead, you find massive coral reefs sometimes
You have
extending
1
for
minute.
miles on.
1 minute.
All right, sitting on top layers laid down by the flood, and even thousands of feet above sea level. For example, the Guadalupe mountain range in Texas is a large coral reef
He
system
really
that
picked
can
up the
be
pace
more than
there.
2,000 feet thick in some places.
Hmm.
The mountain currently has an elevation of over 8,500 feet above sea level and is situated in Permian rock strata. When was this massive coral structure formed in
By the
relation
way,
to the
I upped
flood?
the speed to
Why is it sitting on
1.1
top
just because it's a
meters
fairly
of
long
sediments,
video.
thousands of meters of sediments laid down by the same flood? And when did it get to its current elevation above sea level? But there are many other things I could bring up about the flood that doesn't fit well. But there's one thing in particular I wanted to know is about the ark. How did the ark survive the initial earthquakes that would have been formed when the fountain of the Great Deep was broken open? And how did it survive the heavy bombardment that would have been taking place, since Mr. Hovind argued that the crust of the earth was ejected and caused the craters on the moon,
Time.
and even the craters on the
What is that weird
Alright.
sound? Is there someone dying in the background?
I think they have a separate alarm. And one sounds like an alarm, and one sounds like a
I think you're on
dying
mute, Dr.
toddler.
Hovind.
Oh, no, I'm not saying anything.
Oh.
Is it time for me to start? Hello,
That was
hello.
really
No,
weird.
yes, no problem. Thank you for that opening emotion. I was the one on mute. Sorry, Dr. Hovind, whenever you're ready.
Okay, sounds great. Keep the timer there, 16. Thank you, Mike, for doing this. I appreciate it. I think I can answer all these questions. I don't know if I can get it in 8 minutes or not. Let me talk fast here. You can play the tape back on slow. See if you can get it. Uniformitarianism. The purpose of the debate is to discuss Noah's flood versus uniformitarianism, which best describes what we actually see.
Thanks,
Well,
Ken.
to explain the terms here, Noah's flood, I take the position the Bible is literally true, and the flood happened exactly like it says in the book of Genesis in the King James Bible. It was Noah was in the ark for over a year, but the flood actually probably only lasted a
Yeah,
few
the
months
Hebrew
in some
was
spots.
slightly wrong.
You know, he landed 7 months after it started,
King
but he didn't
James,
get out for
that's
5 more
the right
months because
version.
many reasons, nothing to eat.
Well, actually, an interesting thing is that classical Hebrew doesn't actually have a distinction for Earth in terms of the entire world, and Earth in terms of like the plot of land you're standing on now. They're both just, if I can remember correctly, Eretz, which Aleph. Yeah, I don't remember Hebrew quite well enough, but I do remember that is that in fact one of the features of classical Arabic is that, or not Arabic, Hebrew. Is that yeah, there's no separate word for the whole world versus just one plot of land. So it's actually a perfectly literal reading of the Hebrew version of the flood story to say that the flood covered up a certain land and it covered the highest mountains in that land.
Okay.
So you don't actually have to believe in a truly global flood to be a literalist. Now, I will grant you that literal interpretations have more traditionally assumed a global scale, but you actually don't have to make that assumption in order to still be a biblical literalist. You can say that it was a local flood in terms of like all the area that Noah could see or knew about, and that would still be completely consistent with the actual Hebrew text.
But not with the King James Bible, which is the only real Bible, if you ask Kent Hovind.
That's true. Kent Hovind is a King James only guy, and I probably won't address it, but I have. There are a lot of people who I would say make pretty good discussions about how terrible King James only is and is. Just seek them out, and a lot of them are actually Christians. So, Godless Galaxy, not into paleontology, more of a physics dude. Well, this is going to be a lot of geology, which is really, I guess, neither, or maybe both. But I'll tell you what, Godless. I'm planning on expanding into more of the physics side stuff, like with some Jason Lyle stuff. So stay tuned, and there may be more physics stuff to come.
Eat out there, and the crust of the earth was still flexing. But so let's assume that the Bible story is true. I'll defend that position. You're taking the position that everything can be explained by uniformitarianism. Well, what is that? Notice the doctrine of uniformity. The way things are happening today is the way they've always been happening. Uniformitarianism, according to Britannica.com, and geologists, the doctrine suggesting that Earth's geologic processes acted in the same manner and with essentially the same intensity in the past as they do in the present. So they always shorten it and say the present is the key to the past. That's usually what that means. The way things are happening now is the way they've always been happening. That's the idea behind uniformitarianism, which I think is absolutely ludicrous and silly. But that's the idea.
Oh, I thought
so. If we see a river getting cutting a canyon a little bit
host.
deeper every year, eroding the bottom, we then do the math and calculate how long it took. That's the idea behind uniformitarianism, which is silly. 90% of the canyon might have been formed in 20 minutes, and then it's been going slowly ever since.
Okay, I want to point something out. Uniformitarianism is not simply the idea that current processes have always proceeded in the past at the same rate, and that there have been no catastrophic influences on the history of Earth, right? Uniformitarianism is basically just saying, hey, physics works the same now in terms of geology as it did in the past, which is basically the same assumption that science makes everywhere, that physics now and physics in the past and physics in the future are essentially going to be the same thing so that you can make predictions. Because without that assumption, measurements that you make now mean literally nothing the second after you make them. And they mean nothing in terms of trying to determine what happened in the past. So it's basically just extending that universality of physics to geology. There's no geologist who's going to say that there are no catastrophic events in the geological record of Earth. There are obviously volcanoes, floods, sometimes of really massive scale that have happened in the past and that have left evidence, and no mainstream geologist is going to deny that. It's just ridiculous to say that, this is basically just Kent straw-manning geology. So,
we cover that in great detail on my video number 6 of my series. So, Understanding Evolution website. Uniformitarianism has an article about Charles Lyell. Here it is. Thanks to the pioneering work of researchers.
Oh, one quick thing is, he's definitely reading from his slides, but I wonder if he realizes how low quality his broadcast is, and the fact that his slides are just completely illegible to anyone else but him. Because that's the format he always uses, is he's next to the screen that's mirroring the screen he's using, and it's just so bad.
Like William Smith, geologists in the early 1800s, were able to swiftly organize rock formations into a single colossal record of Earth's history. And this is where the whole problem started. This is absolute baloney. There is no such thing as a geologic column. You can read Britannica. I didn't realize I only have 8 minutes here, so let me get what I can. I'll come back to this if need be. Some of these quotes. The present is the key to the past. I covered this on my video series on Kent Hovind Official YouTube channel. That was line number 6 that we covered. The present is not the key to the past. Here's a dam that washed out in Indiana.
What is going on?
Lake Reservoir.
This isn't.
There's a little bitty creek flowing at the bottom. That little bitty creek did not make that big gash. That big gash formed in minutes when the dam failed, and now the creek flows through the bottom of it. But they somehow think that they can look at how deep it gets every day now and apply that to the past.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's not true. Same thing with Grand Canyon. That little bitty river in the bottom of Grand Canyon, called the Colorado River, did not make the Grand Canyon.
For your
the river just flows through the crack. Grand Canyon's over a mile deep, and the river erodes away maybe an eighth of an inch a year through the solid rock.
I don't understand how you do it.
It is baloney to say that we can take the present and apply it to the past. The Bible warned us in 2 Peter chapter 3 that people like you would come, Mike, knowing this first, that there shall come in the last days scoffers, and I would predict that you scoff at the Bible story as being true.
Okay, look, I don't want to get into everything about biblical prophecy, and is it a good argument, and does the Bible have fulfilled prophecies or not, and are the fulfilled ones like post-diction prophecies or whatever? But here's the thing. Predicting that someone will scoff at your beliefs is basically predicting that not everyone will agree with you. But that's a trivial prediction. Like, Bent, does that seem wrong?
Not to me.
So, I'm not saying that this means that all Bible prophecy is useless or anything, because I don't get into that. But on this one, I'm just going to say it's not a very good argument. Because saying, in the last days there will come scoffers, is like saying, in the last days there will come wind. Like, there's always going to be people who are going to disagree with you. So, and yeah, congrats, Maya. You come by after working so much, and you're on Steve's streams and my streams, and that's a level of dedication that it's award worthy with a wrench. So, you're working now. All right, well, don't get fired on my account. But here we go, more Ken.
For now, you won't be scoffing one day. They scoff at walking after their own lust and saying, where's the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were. That's uniformitarianism right there. Peter warned us in the last days the scoffers were going to say, the way it's happening now is the way it's always been happening. All things continue as they were. For this they willingly are ignorant of. Number one, that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water and in the water. I covered that on video number 2 of my series. What was the earth like? Where'd all the water for the flood come from? Where did it go? You might want to watch my whole video series. People don't understand what that original creation was like. Secondly, the Bible says the scoffers will be willingly ignorant of the flood, whereby the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. Mike, this is talking to you. Okay. But the heavens and the earth, which are now by the same word, are kept in store, reserved unto fire, against the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men. So the Bible warned us in the last days people would be willingly ignorant of the creation about 6,000 years ago, and the flood about 4,400 years ago, and the coming judgment.
Okay, look, again, I'm not saying anything about the accuracy of the Bible or how it's properly interpreted, or really making very many theological claims. But if your discussion is about geology, the Bible says so is not a valid argument.
It's not good evidence. I think geology would be good evidence.
Right. The problem with using the Bible as your argument in an unrelated field is that you first have to establish the Bible as being an accurate source on the field you're talking about. So if you want to say, oh, the Bible is good on geology, you first have to show how the Bible is consistent with geology and predicts future geological data. Then you can use the Bible after you've established that. But you can't just start off saying, the Bible said. And, hey, Alpha Martian, what up, man?
And to add to that, saying that the Bible is literally true and scientifically accurate, that doesn't constitute, determining its actual geological accuracy.
No. And
it's just a baseless claim.
Yeah. And in fact, outside of the Noah story, which, as I've mentioned, you can actually literally take as a local flood, the Bible makes essentially no geological claims. So, and Alpha Martian, what is up is Whiskey and Kent and Bent. And also, I spent like 5 or 6 hours today in a literal metal box in the actual desert, and I hate that. So... Oh, and Alpha Martian is also at work. I'm glad that I could keep people entertained at work. Please keep that up.
That is awesome. Yeah.
Judgment of God coming soon to a city near you, including the Caribbean. Okay, so textbook says over millions of years, the Colorado River carved the Grand Canyon out of solid rock. This is based on the assumption of uniformitarianism. James Hutton and others back in the late 1700s really started this whole idea. At this time, most people in world history, most people in the world believe the Bible story, and the earth is 6,000 years old, and the flood formed everything. James Hutton wrote a book called The Theory of the Earth, and he said the earth is much older than everybody thinks. This was during a time in world history when there were many revolutions going on. The idea was get rid of the king. We had the American Revolution, the Spanish, the French, the German, the Polish. It's called the Age of Anti.
Okay, Kent, even if it were true that there were political motive to say the earth is old, which is what he's going to go for, it doesn't actually mean that the earth isn't old. People can be right for and have investigated the thing for bad reasons and still end up with good evidence. Oh, doing some work, not at work. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, it's just, this isn't an argument, Kent. Not to, channel Stefan Molyneux, whose, famous phrase is not an argument, but, that guy has gone off the deep end, but that's not irrelevant.
Monarchy. Get rid of the king, establish democracy or some other form of government. Communism in some countries, okay? But the Bible says to honor the king. Without getting into all of that, let's just point out that this was a time when people were looking for an excuse to reject the Bible. So James Hutton came along when everybody thought the earth was a few thousand years old.
Time out.
And he, in the late 1700s,
Okay.
Why does someone need an excuse to reject the Bible? If they just want to reject the Bible, why couldn't they just reject the Bible?
Oh, they could. You don't need an excuse to reject the Bible. All you have to do is say, I don't buy it.
So I don't think Kent is onto anything here when he says they're looking for an excuse to reject the Bible. That doesn't make sense to me.
No, it's ridiculous. It's like, look, you can reject anything just by saying I reject it. Now, you can also have particular reasons why you reject it. Like you can say, I reject the Bible because a literal reading of the first chapter of Genesis doesn't square well with modern cosmology. And it's like, okay, that is a reason. I actually don't think it's a particularly good reason because that isn't all of the Bible, and I'm not a big fan of lumping all of the books of the Bible into one big thing. I think they actually all should be taken as individual texts. But, whatever. It's fine. You don't need an excuse to reject the Bible. All you have to do is say, I haven't been convinced. And be honest about it. That's it. Ready?
Yep.
he developed the idea of uniformitarianism, the purpose of this debate. He said processes occurring today are similar to those that occurred in the past. This is a lie. Catastrophes can alter things radically in minutes.
Yeah, we know that, Kent. And catastrophes happen now. And we apply the knowledge that we gain from current or recent catastrophes that happen in a historical time to the geological record in order to recognize elements of geology that were created catastrophically. Like, no one is going to sit around and pretend that some igneous intrusion in the middle of, like, the Phanerozoic wasn't a catastrophic event. Obviously, a volcano erupted. You know the basalt traps that basically cover all of Siberia? Yeah, that was an amazingly catastrophic event. That was the event that's tied to the end Permian extinction, aka the Great Dying, the worst mass extinction in history. Basically, the entire ground over about a quarter or so of the landmass of Earth just opened up and lava flooded onto it, releasing toxic chemicals like various sulfur compounds, killing off everything in the area because obviously you can't live on lava. This is a catastrophic event that's well known and documented in the geological record. No one is pretending that uniformitarianism negates catastrophe. It's just that your made-up catastrophe didn't occur, as you imagine it did. Continuing on.
Uniformitarianism, this is simply not true. Okay, the Bible is the key to the past. It is true there is a rock cycle that sandstone can form in, or sand grains can accumulate with proper cements and stuff and turn to sandstone. There can be weathering, and rocks do go through a cycle. That is true. The uniformitarian idea is that the continents gradually decay. They're transported out to sea. They're deposited as strata in the sea, like the limestone you mentioned, formed underwater. I agree with that. Hutton made up his idea of uniformitarianism in the late 1700s. Hutton observed rocks being broken down into smaller pieces, and he watched as they were carried downstream, and they ended up in the ocean where they formed sediments. And then he thought maybe this ocean sediments are uplifted as the mountains lift up over time.
What do you mean maybe, Kent? They obviously are, because known ocean deposits can be found above land in uplifted sediments. Like, that's not a maybe question. I don't know.
And restart the whole cycle again. Now, it is true that the crust of the earth is flexible and moving. That's correct, okay? And along those cracks, there are earthquakes and volcanoes, generally along those fault lines. I think the earth has 47 recognized plates right now, like busted up eggshell.
Sure.
It's interesting that all the major mountain ranges follow the coastlines. Appalachian Mountains follow the North Atlantic. Rocky Mountains follow the North Pacific. Andes Mountains follow the South Pacific. I think this happened at the same time because of the same thing.
How? Okay, how did the Appalachian Mountains happen at the same time as the Rocky Mountains when obviously the continents are moving, like the Appalachian Mountains are moving away from the nearest continental mass that they could have collided with to result in this upthrust, whereas the Rocky Mountains are mostly the result of various... It doesn't... No. No. And the Rocky Mountains, that's largely a result of subduction of the Pacific plate. Ben, I might not make it through this.
You know what? I can tell you're upset. And the reason is because this time it's personal.
That's true.
So take a deep breath and a big drink, and then let's keep going.
I can't drink too big. I gotta drive places in the morning, or maybe the early afternoon, or both. I don't know.
The Bible says in Psalm 104, toward the end of the flood, the mountains lifted up, the valleys sank down. If we had a world covered in water, and one side lifts up, the water's going to rush down over here, and this is going to become a mountain range, and this is going to become a beach, and this is going to be the ocean. Noah's flood explains the gross geography of the earth as well.
But that doesn't explain why there wasn't a mountain formed in the middle of the continent, Kent. Why couldn't that happen? You can't just say that mountains follow coastlines and that water runs off mountains, therefore Noah's flood. That's not a valid chain of argument.
Well as the fine geography of the earth. But kids are taught this uniformitarian idea. The idea that geological features form slowly over long periods of time. This is ludicrous.
That's not what uniformitarianism is. That is a straw man of it. Many things form slowly over time because they have to. For instance, fine-grained slate and fine-grained limestone, like you find in the Solnhofen limestone, those have to form slowly. If they didn't form slowly, they wouldn't be as fine-grained. They wouldn't preserve things as detailed as they do. That's why they're Lagerstätten formations often, slate and limestone that is because they form slowly with fine-grained sediments that take a long time to settle out of the water. You can't actually get bits of rock entirely composed of fine-grained sediments that settle out rapidly because of hydrologic sorting, something you're a big fan of, Kent.
It does not account for catastrophes like Noah's flood. Kids are taught in school that the similar fossils are found on opposite sides of the ocean, and this is supposed to be evidence for Pangea. Similar fossils are found all over the world.
It's not just that similar fossils are found on opposite sides. As you can show in that slide that you're presenting right now, it's that there are actually more complicated relationships. Like I noticed that you have something that looks kind of like a dicynodont in that gray area, kind of beigeish gray, upside down U shape. It's funny how it goes from Africa to India to Antarctica to and stops. And then there's another group of fossils that I can't see how you labeled them, but they go from South America to Africa. All of this lines up not only with the fossil record, but also with which sediments on which continents can be correlated to which sediments on other sets in terms of the actual geological column. There's no way that a flood would make all of these coincidences happen all at the same time. It's not consistent. It would jumble everything all together. And that's not what we see. It's not just that the same fossils are found on each side. It's that there are certain patterns where we don't find certain other fossils on either side of these oceans. So for instance, why is it that early in the Cenozoic, we don't actually see equines in Eurasia? That doesn't happen until after the ice ages start, that we start seeing equids in Eurasia. Well, it's because they actually evolved in North America, and at the time North America was separated from Africa and Eurasia. But if you go further back in time, we see the exact same Mesozoic fauna and Paleozoic fauna up into like the mid-Jurassic, because those areas were connected, or when they weren't, they were connected. They were only slightly separated so that animals could still cross between them, sometimes by accident. It's not just as simple as, oh, we find similar fossils on both sides of the continents, so it's just the flood. No, there's a complicated pattern of faunal succession and biogeology through time that is inconsistent with a flood being the cause of the fossil record.
This is evidence of a flood. Noah's flood did this. I mean, there are fossils found at the South Pole.
Yeah, there are hot weather tropical fossils found at the South Pole, which even if you were going to assume that there was some kind of more homogeneous environment, it's just the fact that it's at the pole and has to endure months of nighttime means that you can't get giant tropical forests and things, which is one of the things that we find there. So, Antarctica had to have been farther north in the past, or you simply couldn't have had those biomes there. Continuing.
There's evidence of Noah's flood. The theory that Earth's features are mostly accounted for by gradual, small-scale processes. This is the problem. They apply this uniformitarian, I wouldn't even call it thinking, because they're not thinking. They apply it to Pangea, apes to humans, mountain building, etc. Well, we got a lot more to go. This is going to be fun.
You're
Go ahead,
done,
Mike.
Kent. Stop.
Did you want me to stop the video?
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that opening presentation, Dr. Hovind. I really appreciate it. We'll go on to the rebuttal round, 5 minutes. Mike, whenever you're ready, I will start the timer.
All right. So again, thank you, Ken, for that presentation there. As you correctly defined, that uniformitarianism is based on the idea that the present is the key to the past. However, they're not implying that to... Oh, sorry about that.
Oh, there we go.
Okay, so yes, we know that the present is the key to the past, but it doesn't mean that that all current processes were happening the same way in the past. They can accelerate and so on under specific conditions. Sorry about that. I'm getting a call. Okay, right. So the present is the key to the past in regards to figuring out how certain geological features were formed. There were several of them I did point out in my opening that doesn't fit with a catastrophic model or a global flood model, like we mentioned the Appalachian Mountains range. How do you get a stratified mountain range, like a folded mountain, between divergent plates? Usually creationists argue that you get a mountain range when continents or tectonic plates buckle, but these plates are divergent. So how do you get them to buckle when they're divergent? It's fun that you mentioned Pangea.
That's a really good point. The Appalachian Mountains show evidence of having formed the same way the Himalayan mountains formed, which is when two continental plates smash together. And the fact that they're so low right now that they barely qualify as mountains is evidence of their age. But the question remains, how do you get buckled up mountains between divergent plates? I don't think you can.
And in a way that you dismiss Pangea, but standing for truth and where I'm at, they accept that Pangea is a real thing. So I'd like to know what is the consensus among creationists on Pangea, if I should take your word for it, or should I take the consensus of creationists on that? You mentioned scoffers. Well, I'm not a scoffer, it's just that where I'm from, flood geology is alien to me. There are no, I'm not familiar with young earth creationists, only until I logged onto YouTube 5 years ago. So it's not something I scoff at. It's something that, it's alien to me. And I would like to know, how does my slice of the world fit into your model? I've done the research, but creations don't seem to have anything there for me. You said that there was no geological column. That again is strange, because most creationists do accept that a geological column exists.
What are you pointing at, Ken? No one can read that.
Arrangement of fossils by means of density and mobility and whatever. Even standing for truth argues using the geological column.
Did you just see Ken Hovind look at his hand?
Yeah, I don't know what
You know
he's
how he
doing.
likes to write things down in his hand? I think I figured it out. I think they're slide numbers.
Maybe.
I literally think he put slide numbers in Sharpie on his hand, and he's looking at his hand so that he can jump to those slide numbers.
Or like what tape it was.
Something
Video
like
number
that.
7 or
Video
whatever.
number 7. Order my VHS. Because it's 1993.
That's ridiculous. And probably true.
Okay, continuing on. Sorry, that was just... I just had that. I think that's what it is. Yeah, continuing.
You deny exist. Um, where did the water go? Here's a good question. Where did the water go? Because, for example,
Hey, this guy says water, almost kind of like how Ken says it. Maybe Kent is also Caribbean and we just don't know.
Anything's possible.
Well,
at the end of the flood, the boat or the ark rested on top the mountains or the mountains of Ararat, which means that the sea level had to be at a certain level.
line number 7, I can see that.
Mountain. It would be nice to know where
The
all
fact that
that
he's going
water
through
was
slides
displaced
makes me feel like
after the boat was
I might be
landed
right about
on
this.
the mountain. Let me see. Right. So I did mention the arrangement of fossils in the fossil record and the complete lack of plants and animals and marine certain marine life like marine tetrapods and so on and sharks in the Cambrian. I didn't hear you address that, but I don't. It hasn't got to your rebuttals yet, so I think I'll wait on that. Let me see what else there is to rebut. There wasn't much of it. Actually,
It's true, there wasn't much to rebut because Kent didn't say much that mattered.
The Grand Canyon, usually, he didn't bring up the argument as yet, maybe he didn't bring it up yet, but he argued that the river of the Grand Canyon had to flow uphill. He usually made that argument. But I've never seen any geologists explain it that way. Usually they explain it by, the river doing its thing, and then the plateau would rise, and then be gradually cut down by the river itself.
You've got 30 seconds. 30 seconds.
Oh, I got 30 seconds. It would be nice to know. There are certain features in the canyon where it's like oxbow, horseshoe carvings and so on, which is consistent with a river carving. How is that explained by a global flood? And something else I wanted to know is, again, how do you get these things like footprints, overlapping footprints and egg nests and so on, sandwiched between layers in the flood? How was that? How could the flood preserve things like that? A single flood.
Yeah, good question.
Okay, just on time there, Mike. So thank you so much for that. Dr. Hoven, whenever you are good to go, I can start the timer for you. Take your time.
All right. Thank you so much, Mike. I'll be glad to answer all these questions. I don't think there's time enough to answer all you've asked, but the Earth is awfully big, okay? 29 or 25,000 miles around the Earth. There can be storms going on. There could be hurricanes going on right now in Indonesia, and we wouldn't know about it at all in Lenox, Alabama. There are probably earthquakes going on right now someplace in the world, and I don't feel a thing over here. So the Earth is really, really huge to begin with. So if there was a flood going on and Noah's busy floating around in the ark, there could be catastrophes happening on the planet. He would never know if he's in a calm spot.
Okay, hold on. Kent just said if he's in a calm spot. But later on, he's going to talk about how gigantic the tides were at the time because there were no continents to interrupt them, and how the tides would go up and down by 200 meters or some crazy crap like that, and how they were going at 900 miles an hour laterally, or 90 miles an hour, or whatever. Either way, it's ridiculous. So, if there were 6-ish hour cycles of 90 mile an hour water moving laterally, there is no such thing as a calm spot. That's just no. You can't have it both ways, Kent. Either the flood was relatively placid and didn't involve this worldwide global 90 mile an hour tide that you rely on for your erroneous understanding of, stratification, or there were calm spots, but the stratification of the Earth can't even be badly explained in that way. And yeah, he also says some parts of the world might have been a foot of water for a week and then dry, which seems to contradict the story of Noah sending out the dove to get the olive branch, or I think it was an olive branch. But, I mean, I don't know. He can probably talk his way out of that one.
You're assuming the entire Earth was chaos the entire time. As far as you asked, where did the water go?
That's because you say that, Kent. You say the entire Earth was chaos at the entire time. That's how you explain stratification.
So there's enough water on the Earth right now to cover the Earth 1.5 miles deep,
No,
plenty
there
to
isn't.
drown in. If you smoothed out the Earth right now, and by the way, the Earth, if it were shrunk down to the size of this 12-inch globe, you couldn't find Mount Everest on it at this scale.
That's
A
great.
5-mile mountain on an 8,000-mile
I mean, I
Earth.
can find it on a globe, and the globe that I use is the size of that globe. So I don't know what he's talking about.
Here's my favorite thing: there's enough water to cover the entire globe. If it were completely smooth, well, okay, that's trivial. Would it have been completely smooth? Why would you say that? Why would it have been completely smooth? Was there only flat plains as far as the eye could see before
The
the flood?
entire world was perfectly smooth except for Mount Ararat.
Oh, man. I shouldn't have spent so much time in the desert today.
Compared to a 1-foot globe, you can do the math. Mount Everest would be like 0.0001 inch high. You couldn't even find Mount Everest.
Look, I'll agree that if you had a purely accurate topographic globe that only had a 1-to-1 scale vertical deviation, it would be essentially impossible to find anything in terms of elevation. The Earth is super smooth, but it would have to be a whole lot more smooth for any of this to make sense, and you haven't given any evidence that it was.
But if you smoothed out the world, the water would be 8,000 feet deep everywhere. So where did the water go? It's still here. It's in the oceans. They're ginormous. All the continents in the world will fit in the Pacific Ocean, all of them. So
yeah, that's
it's not a matter of
true.
where the water goes. Obviously, there's plenty of water here on the Earth to flood
No,
the world. It's just a
still
matter of
not.
reshuffling the surface. Again, as I mentioned during the flood, the crust of the Earth was broken up and sections would be floating. One piece lifts up a mile and goes down. If something lifts up 5 miles to make Mount Everest, 5 miles on a 10,000-mile plate is nothing. Zero. Real close to zero. So
What is your
I think the flood
argument?
is the best explanation for all of the geology that we see.
No,
I mentioned there
it's
is no such thing as a
terrible.
geologic column. I am so sorry that other creationists believe that there is.
Okay, so here's where I'm going to give my explanation for the thumbnail for this video, which is about evaporites. So, I don't know if you know, Ben, do you know what an evaporite is?
Why don't you explain what that means, for the audience? No, I don't know.
Exactly. So an evaporite is a kind of deposit in the geological record that's made by evaporating water. So the most obvious form of evaporite is various salts. So you know how there are salt mines around the world? Like, you ever get that fancy pink Himalayan salt, Bent?
Yeah, I actually have some right now in my kitchen.
I do too. And that stuff comes from various salt deposits in, like, well, obviously the Himalayas. Okay, well, there are also significant salt deposits in South America and various other places. Well, some of these evaporite deposits occur in, like, the middle of the Phanerozoic period, or eon? I think that's an eon. I don't know, don't quote me, I'm drunk at geology, whatever. But anyway, how do you get evaporite deposits in the middle of a global flood? Deposits of salt laid down by evaporating water that are covered by water? It just no. Also, Maya, damn it, Kent, if you're going to Bible, you got to go all in. God opened the firmament and brought the waters forth of the deep. They drain when God got... Yeah, I mean, if you're going to go full literal Bible, you're going to have to take on some of those cosmological aspects of the ancient Hebrews that are not accurate. Like that the earth exists protected by a shield from the cosmic ocean. Like, that's pretty obviously what the ancient Hebrews believed. They're wrong, but, But anyway, yeah, so evaporite deposits within what Kent would call the flood layers, because Kent basically says that everything from, like, the late Precambrian all the way to, like, the end of the Mesozoic, or maybe a little bit later, is all flood deposits. Almost all of the fossil-bearing strata are just from the flood. Yeah, well, guess what, Kent? There are evaporite deposits in that. There are also those egg nests that emotionally sensitive Moticon mentioned. There are trackways. None of this can form under a flood, especially a flood that you described where there's 90-mile-an-hour waters rushing around the globe. So I'm going to start the video back up.
They're wrong. I am right. There is no geologic column. There are layers to the Earth. That's not a question. Man, I've taught earth science for
That's literally what the geological column is.
15 years. I could talk about this for a long time if you'd like. There's no question the Earth has layers. The question is, how did they get there? You can get a jar or a bottle of dirt, sand, gravel, clay, water, and shake it up. It'll settle into layers for you in minutes. We've got these little toys we have play with here, the sand toys. Flip it over. It'll make a whole bunch of layers in just...
By the way, someone mentioned the canopy theory. And this is where I'm going to reveal it. I have an interview with Landon Kirtnell, an astronomer and planetary scientist and mathematician, coming up in September. And I am definitely going to talk about the canopy theory during that interview. So stay tuned for that. It should be live. So, yeah. Get hyped.
That sounds pretty awesome.
It will be pretty awesome. Yeah.
Just a few minutes. So during Noah's flood, all of the layers were formed probably in a few months, and animals would automatically be sorted based upon their body density. Just Google, what is the body density of reptiles? And write that number down. I don't know what it is. I'll make up a number, but it's something close to...
Okay, hold on. I'm going to Google it. Body density of reptiles. Reptile scale. Lipid storage and utilization in reptiles. Something about reptiles maintaining their body temperature. What percentage of a reptile's mass is made up by water? It's almost like that's a stupid thing to Google, and it's not going to actually just get me a number. But let's
Try
see
Bing.
what Kent said Google.
True.
I'm following Kent's instructions. Puffalopagus is here. Hi, Puffalopagus. Welcome.
Body density of reptiles, 1.002 or something like that. Slightly heavier than water. Then you Google the body density of mammals. It'll be a different number.
Oh, here we go. Body density of mammals. Body density of mammals. Oh, human density. Oh, there actually is an article about this. And, yeah. Human density is approximately 1 kilogram per liter, same as freshwater, which is not surprising. Blah, 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 blah. It would have helped if there were actually a number that I could get for reptiles. Let's click on this link. Oh, it just brings me to images, which only has birds and mammals. It's almost like this isn't well studied, Kent, and you're making things up. But since birds are reptiles, and they have about the same density distribution as mammals, I'm going to have to say that you're talking bullshit, Kent.
Honestly, that's
And
a
body
boom
density of
roasted
birds.
right there.
Thank
It
you.
really is.
Thank you. Take that, Oscar. Totally gay. Boom, roasted. And Andy's even gayer than Oscar. Boom, roasted. Yeah, I watched The Office. Dinosaurs like The Office too.
Not the weight, the density. How much does it weigh per cubic centimeter or per cubic inch, whichever system you want to use. So, of course, the animals are going to tend to be sorted based on their body density. It's got nothing to do with evolution. Of course, you're going to find clams at the bottom. Here's our little toy here. These layers form very, very rapidly.
But you don't just find clams at the bottom, Kent. You find them all the way through the Phanerozoic strata. Basically from where they appear in, like, the mid-Paleozoic all the way up till now. Like, oh, and Puffalopagus, you are welcome for me commenting on your Twitter. I'm not on Twitter much, but, you know, when I see things that I feel need comment, I try to comment. Yeah, don't say that. Oh, the real non sequitur says, no, don't say that cunt is making things up. And yeah, he totally is. I hate this whole clam thing because they actually completely refute Kent's hydrologic sorting thing. Because it's fair enough. If the fossil record were actually hydrologically sorted, clams would sink to the bottom. But then why do we find them in like Cenozoic strata too? It doesn't make sense.
And in a rock tumbler, you throw in rough rocks, and after they tumble for a few weeks and drive mom nuts from the basement, all the noise, they come out smooth. You put them in like this, they come out like this.
Have you ever
All
had
over
one
the
of
world,
those?
Mike, gravel is rounded.
Nope.
I did.
I'm
It
in the
was
middle of a
great.
gravel pit, Lenox, Alabama, 140 acres of a gravel pit. That's where our camp is. During the tides of the days in the days of Noah,
Okay, I'm just gonna have to say that no gravel I've ever seen has been as smooth as rock tumbler rocks. Because rock tumblers can make pretty much anything look like a freaking gem. I'm
Yeah.
not even exaggerating. I had one as a kid, and I just put a bunch of random rocks from my family's garden in there, and they came out looking amazing. And that's just not how gravel from a pit ends up. In fact, most gravel quarries, the gravel isn't actually quarried as gravel. It's just a bunch of rock that people basically bust up into gravel. I feel like Kent just hasn't seen enough gravel, but I see a lot of gravel every day. Let me tell you, Kent, it's not all smooth. That's one of the reasons why it kind of sucked to walk barefoot on gravel. And I used to do that because my grandmother had a gravel paved driveway at her summer home that I used to stay at as a kid most summers. And oh my god, was that gravel sharp on my little tender, like, 5-year-old feet. This was hundreds of millions of years ago, by the way. So, you know, or
Exactly.
tens of millions of years ago, whatever.
the moon would pull the water up, make a high tide, like it does today. But if there were no continents to interrupt it, the tides on the ocean would become harmonic. It'd be a 200-foot tide.
Why would they become harmonic? Wouldn't they keep the same frequency that they do now? What would they harmonize with? Is he just using word salad?
I think so.
Okay.
Tidal change every 6 hours and 12 minutes. So as the moon holds the bump of water up, the earth is turning around under it, and this is going to make erosion like crazy and going to tumble all the rocks. I think we have a geologic sorting based upon a few months worth of tides and Noah's flood. As the tide comes rushing in, it would reach the speed of the earth turning at that latitude. Here in Lenox, Alabama, we're turning nearly 900 miles an hour. Tidal change at the Bay of Fundy right now is about 40 feet. The tidal bore coming in can be enormous, the damage it can do. Just Google tidal bore, B-O-R-E. It's unbelievable, just the tide.
Okay, I have to Google that now. Kent told me to. Give me a second. Oh, I'm sorry. I just knocked my mic over. I'm sorry
What
about
are
that
you
horrible
doing?
noise. I just told you. I'm accidentally.
It's because of your
Sorry.
short dinosaur arms, isn't it?
It is. It's hard to have a microphone that's far enough away from my arms with my short dinosaur arms that I can't knock it over. Tidal bore, B-O-R-E. Okay. World's largest tidal bore from China's Jiangtang River. 2-minute video clip. I'm gonna play it in the thing. Thousands of... Oh my goodness, this is way too slow. Let's see. Playback speed. 2. Here we go. Okay, so... Yep. I mean, that looks pretty crappy to be in, but I'm not sure how it helps your argument. Like, this is going to explain faunal succession? Somehow? I don't really understand what he's arguing, Bent. Make it make sense to me.
The only way it makes sense is if you play it in reverse. When you listen to The Dark Side of the Moon,
Also in reverse?
also in reverse, I think.
Okay, well, I don't have the time or attention span for that, so...
Maybe if you give yourself a lobotomy, then it'll make sense. I don't really know.
I don't want a lobotomy.
No, I don't either, but I think that's what Kent went with, so
Okay,
I don't
well,
know.
I'm
Who
not
knows?
I'm not going to do that right now. So, I googled it, Kent.
Tide coming. This isn't the waves, this is the tide. People surf on the tide in some places.
Unidentified Leviathan is here. Unidentified Leviathan is one of my favorite, I don't want to say antagonists, because I don't think he's a bad guy, but disagreeers, I don't know. I'm a big fan of Unidentified Leviathan. He seems like a really nice guy, and be nice to him, chat, or else. Yeah, just or else.
During Noah's flood, the tidal change would be phenomenal. The moon and sun just simply hold their bump of water while we spin around under it. So the water would have to be rushing to fill that bump at the speed the Earth is turning. Earth was a giant rock tumbler during Noah's flood. Can you explain, Mike, with your theology and geology, why is gravel all over the world rounded?
I can explain it. It's not. Problem solved.
I mean, I've been all over the country and actually other countries around the world on deployments, and
Yeah.
it's not like I pay a ton of attention to gravel, but every time I think of, oh, I remember gravel, it was not round. Every time. It was not round.
I wish that all the gravel in the world looked like it came out of a rock tumbler, because that would have spared me a fair bit of pain in the past. But it just isn't. I don't even know what Ken is trying to argue here, but, well, you know.
Why are sediments found in layers at all? This happens very rapidly in a rock tumbler like Noah's flood. All these layers would be deposited quickly. Here we are in Lenox, Alabama, 31.3366 degrees north latitude. We're turning nearly 900 miles an hour. The tide would go up and down every 6 hours and 12 minutes, and it has to rush in and out of that bump. It's going to fall. You can do the math if you'd like to get our latitude here. Oh, time's up. Anyway, so I think water going sideways at 900 miles an hour is going to form all the layers and sort things by body density. There is no geologic column.
But that's the thing, Ken. Things aren't sorted by body density. You have birds, which have one of the lowest body densities of all tetrapods, found from, like, the mid-Jurassic all the way till now. But you also have turtles, which have a ridiculously high body density in most cases, found all the way from, like, if you're counting, like, proto-turtle things, all the way from, like, the late Permian till now. And if you're only counting actual turtles in, like, the modern I can't say it. Trust me, the scientific names for turtles are hard to say. But yeah, if you're just counting the actual turtles, then they're basically from, like, the early Mesozoic until now. With the birds! Why are birds and turtles and clams found in the same recent strata? And yet, you're saying that, oh, it's just body density. That's not how density works, Kent. If it were actually just body density, then you wouldn't find clams, say, or turtles, say, in recent Cenozoic strata. Yet you do. It just doesn't work.
Doesn't exist.
Thank you so much for that rebuttal there, Dr. Hoven. Very clear and concise from both you gentlemen. Now we're going to jump into a short discussion period. I'm going to make sure that it's going smooth, no interruptions, equally timed, of course. And I'm also going to leave some time for some really solid concluding statements. So we will start. I'll start the timer right now, and whoever wants to start, go ahead.
Questions. Which one's most important to you? Which one you want answered?
Oh, my questions?
Sure. Yeah, I got a question mark written by a bunch of stuff here. I don't know which one's more important to you.
Oh, let me see which is the most important.
Well, let me ask a question, Mike. First of all, do you really want an answer to these questions? If I was able to answer all of them, would you accept the Bible as being true and give your heart to the Lord and get saved? Come be a Christian brother with me?
You'd need a much more than answering these geological questions.
I'm sorry, I just realized I muted myself on the stream for that last bit, where I paused. So, yeah, my bad on that. So Puffalopicus, Godless Galaxy says, why isn't the heaviest dinosaur on the bottom layer? And yeah, it's a good point. There are relatively dense dinosaurs, like ceratopsians and later thyreophorans and such, that are found at the very top of the Mesozoic, like the end Cretaceous. And yet, what we find at the earliest dinosaurs that we find, things like Coelophysis or various prosauropods like Plateosaurus aren't nearly as heavy or nearly as dense, and yet they're lower in the strato. It doesn't work. Hydrologic sorting simply does not actually predict the locations that we find for actual fossils. It just doesn't. And Puffalophagus, Kent would break my mind with dumb almost every time I watch him if it weren't for this sweet, sweet alcohol.
But you broke his mind in your debate with him.
I did. That guy did not know what to go.
Amazing.
On.
I need to watch that again.
Go for it. I think I've watched it a couple times. I don't know. It doesn't matter. And Unidentified Leviathan says, yeah, of course, Kent chooses the absolute worst evidence. And you're right. There are better pieces of evidence for creationism that Kent could use, but for some reason he persists in just using the worst versions. But hey, you know what? Kent with Bent isn't about countering the best of creationism or anything like that. But it is about having fun with Bent here and chat and having an excuse to have some booze and having a good time. Like, let's be honest. This is just a fun thing for me to do.
Right.
And it's fun in a way that makes me want to kill myself, which is weird, but it's still true.
I don't know if that's normal.
Hey, you don't know how dinosaurs have fun, Bent, because you're not a dinosaur.
True, I'm not a dinosaur.
So this is how dinosaurs get fun out of their lives. So stop being a speciesist and have fun.
Sorry.
Okay, we're going to continue.
Questions. There's much more to the Bible than geology. Yeah.
Take more than that. Okay.
Yeah. But I could accept at least the flood model if you could answer some of these questions. What I wanted to know is, again, you talked about the Appalachian Mountains. I think you pronounce it better than I. So how do we get a stratigraphied folded mountain range that's between two divergent plates?
Well, the stratigraphy, the little strata to the Earth, would all be laid down very rapidly. There's a videotape called Sediments Experiments in Stratification. It's been out for years. It's from the Navy.
I watched this video about stratification from the Navy and the whole horizontal stratification. But the problem is, you can see, even in Kent's own slide, right? It's right there in front of you. In front of him, too, because he looks at the same slides in front of him. Because Kent can't do multi-screen. He just mirrors his screen. Each layer is a layer of graded bedding. And that's not what the geological column is. It's not all just graded bedding. If it were layer upon layer of graded bedding, then you know what? I would be 100% on Kent's team on this. But it isn't. Wait, Godless, you debated SFT? Huh. That's cool. Can you, at me on Twitter or something with your video for that? Because I would be very interested to see that. So, please, at me on Twitter. But here we go.
Navy research laboratory they have in Fort Collins, Colorado, where they do experiments with how rapidly do sediments form in moving water. And they point out very quickly that as water is moving sideways, it forms 8 or 10 or 20 layers at the same time.
Yeah, layers of graded bedding.
It's sideways movement of the water is doing this. Google experiments in stratification. It's a little boring, the guy speaking, going kind of slow for me anyway.
I'm not going to Google
great
that,
material on how stratification
way too much.
happens rapidly. So that what is now the Appalachian Mountains would have all been laid down during the flood and then folded up during the last part of the flood as the mountains arose and the valleys sank down. Psalm 104. Rocky Mountains must have lifted up after the Appalachians. I would guess that only because the Rockies are more rugged and the Appalachians are more rounded. They probably had Appalachian probably had some time under the last part of the flood, maybe the last few months, with the water going by and rounded them off. So they're both stratified.
Yeah, but Kent, that negates your claim that essentially all of the Phanerozoic was created by the flood deposition. Because those sediments in the Appalachian that are correlated with sediments farther west would have had to... I mean, they would have formed at the same time and uplifted at the same time, but then for some reason, uplift continued without erosion in the Rockies, but didn't in the Appalachians? That's not how any of this works. Bent, am I going insane?
Well, you are, but that's unrelated to your previous claim that that's not how any of this works.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Rockies and Appalachian. But one is more rounded, probably because it happened a few months before the Rocky Mountains happened. Does that make any sense? Go ahead.
Months.
Right. So the question was not as to when it was formed, but to how, because usually creationists would argue that folded mountains are formed by buckling. That's how it's formed under a uniformitarian model as well.
Okay.
Get a better mic. Emotionally stuff.
Yeah, mountains.
So how do you get up to...
Right. Mountains can form several different ways. I taught earth science for years. I can give you the long, boring story if you'd like. But obviously, there are mountains formed by volcanoes and stuff like that. That's different. That would be a igneous rock. But during the flood, the layers would form probably in a few months as the water's moving back and forth with the tide. Then if the crust is broken like an eggshell, pieces of that crust might be moving up, down, right, left, side to side. You can get strike, slip faults, or vertical, horizontal faults. Earth can move different ways. But if I took a piece of carpeting in a room and started pushing it one way, it would automatically wrinkle just by lateral movement. So if the fountains of the deep broke open, like the Bible says, the lateral movement of the water along these cracks.
Oh my goodness. You know what? Cheers to you, Kent. You got something right about geology, and that is frickin' amazing to me. Ben, join me in a toast to Kent Hovind, because he got something right in this debate.
It's about time, Kent.
Seriously. Cheers. And, I'm saying out loud, my Twitter is at Dinosaur_Dapper. Also, you can find that if you go to my channel page. So, Pufflepicus, what? If you crack an egg, you cannot move the shell over the other pieces of the shell without breaking the egg. And Pufflepicus, I'm going to agree with you, although I'm going to also say that, like, Kent doesn't have to make perfect analogies because no analogy is perfect. So I'm going to actually let that one slide. Unidentified Leviathan says, though through PE, I'm not sure what PE means, it's simply impossible to move one creature to... Oh, paleontological evidence, maybe? It's simply impossible to prove one creature is related to another. Through gradualism, you would need hundreds of probably thousands of fossils to prove it. And I would say that if there were no other evidences for common ancestry, that would be true. But since evidence for common ancestry among extant organisms is just overwhelming, that the idea of extending it to the fossil record is trivial. I mean, it's... Evidence for common ancestry from genetics is just so overwhelming that it is perverse to be familiar with that literature and still maintain that there is not common ancestry. It's actually even been tested against other options like common design, and just been shown to be hundreds of thousands of times more likely. There just isn't a competition between common ancestry and special creation in terms of just modern organisms. So, yeah. Since that's the case, the idea of extending it to the fossil record is trivial.
I cover this in great detail with a lot of pictures. It'll take me a minute to call them up. But on my video number 6, what did Noah's flood do to the world? Where did all... like probably
did
India
nothing to the
was
world, Kent,
pushed up into
because Noah's
what is
flood,
now
as you
Asia.
understand
The
it
whole
at
Indian
least, just
subcontinent
didn't
was
happen.
pushed up that way during Noah's flood as the crust is cracked up and moving around, and it would lift up the whole Himalaya range. But it's only lifted up 5 miles. I mean, 5 miles compared to 8,000-mile Earth. Again, that's near nothing. So,
Yeah,
but that probably
I'm
happened.
not
I
gonna
agree there's
disagree
mountain
with the
building.
scale
I think
there.
there's mountain erosion. I agree with all that. I agree there's sedimentation. I do not agree that we can apply uniformitarianism to the process, though. You guys are willingly ignorant of the flood.
I want to point out, you know how one of Kent's big evidences, I'm just going to say evidences because I watch too much creationist crap. And in creationism, you can count evidence, apparently.
Okay.
But one of Kent's big pieces of evidence, or whatever, about stratification is that whole, the lateral movement of water can lay down multiple layers. Okay. Well... Ah, crap, I'm too drunk. I just lost my train of thought.
Oh, shucks.
It contradicted something else that Ken said, but the whiskey I need to keep myself sane means I'm
That's
I'm
the problem with so many evidences is...
Okay, look. Here's the thing, right? The difference between count and non-count nouns is essentially arbitrary. There's some small amount of logic with it in some cases, but I actually... It kind of bugs me when creationists, quote-unquote, debunkers... Also... Unidentified Leviathan retracted a message. I'm sorry. I thought someone had timed him out, and I would object to that. Anyway, yeah, the fact that some quote-unquote creationist debunkers object to the use of evidences as a word, I find silly and pointless, because I know enough about linguistics to say that prescriptive grammar is stupid. But we'll keep going.
That would form 95% of what we see on the planet today.
Okay. So, right. So, I mean, I don't want to keep repeating myself, but we need a mechanism that could. I mean, we know of a mechanism that can cause a mountain to form on convergent plate boundaries. When they converge, they buckle. They tend to do that. But between divergent plates, you don't get any formations of mountains there because there is no pressure.
They're not going this way, they're going this way.
Well, compression, yeah, absolutely. Compression of plates as they move back and forth, as like I mentioned, shove a piece of, I got pictures here somewhere, I'm trying to find it, but shove a piece of carpet toward the wall and it'll automatically wrinkle. Up in Canada and British Columbia, there are folded mountains, which are obvious from lateral compression, not vertical, sideways. It was compressed.
Yeah.
Let's see, I've got pictures of it here. It helps if you ask the questions in the same order that I have my slides, because I already got about 10,000 of them here. That's it.
Illuminati Dawn, we get drunk when we drink enough whiskey. And I bought enough whiskey to get very drunk and possibly call into work and say, "Oh, I'm feeling bad."
You'd think after 100 million years you'd be able to retire.
You would think that, and yet I still go out into the desert and walk into hot metal boxes for stupid reasons. Also, hot metal boxes that have air conditioning units that aren't turned on for literally no good reason. There just isn't a good reason not to put the 120 AC power onto those that would power them. But for some reason, the client where I work is like, "No, we're not ready." And I'm going to tell a quick story about the client. When my company bid for this contract, originally, yeah, and Maya says, "Isn't that called an oven?" Yeah, basically. So when my company originally bid for this contract, we went in with a PowerPoint presentation. And they said, "No. Come back when you have put this PowerPoint presentation on a Google Slides presentation. Because we don't want to see the Microsoft PowerPoint." And that's all you need to know.
Okay, that does say a lot about a company.
Well, I mean, I didn't say it about the company, but you can infer whatever you want. Here we go.
Joke, okay. But I think the creationist can easily explain the formation of folded mountains. Here I'm coming up on the pictures, okay. No, it wasn't in that section. Yeah, the plates are moving. I don't question that.
I wonder if Kent
Okay, the
Hovind
plates
got
can be
like
stretched
a
out,
license to
but if
have
they're going
one
out this way, it's
PowerPoint
crowding
document.
together somewhere else.
I'm
And
sorry.
so he
Say,
put-
say that again. I didn't hear you.
If Kent got a license just for one PowerPoint document, so he puts all 10,000 slides into one document. Like,
He had like like a 30-day license.
something like that.
Just cram them all into the same PowerPoint. Oh, that wouldn't surprise me, really.
I mean, if one place is moving here, it's being squeezed somewhere else. That's common sense 101. I think if that's what you're, yeah. I think during the flood in the days of Noah, the Bible says the fountains of the deep broke open. I don't think anybody argues with the fact that there is an enormous amount of water in the crust of the earth today. There is a lot of water in the crust of the earth. You know, a Japanese government did a study on that, said there's probably 10 oceans full of water in the crust of the earth. During the flood in the days of Noah, the fountains of the deep broke open. The earth cracked up into probably 47 plates. I don't know how many there were then. Some of the plates are locked together now, and there's no more movement. Some still have movement. And those are the active plates where we still have earthquakes, volcanoes, etc. I'll find the slides before the debate's over about the lateral movement. But the British Columbian mountains, which are obviously wrinkled like this, if you look closely at the sediment layers, look at them under a magnifying glass, there's no cracks in them. They were all bent while the layers were soft.
Wait, they were all what? While the layers were soft?
I think he's referring to me.
Yeah.
They were all me.
Yeah. Bent, did you know that you were the entire geological record of Earth?
I must have forgotten.
Well, congratulations on being such an important piece of evidence.
Thanks. Now I'm glad that Kent is finally acknowledging me.
Well, he acknowledged me a while ago, right? And yeah, unidentified Leviathan. I know it's bent as in, you know.
Yeah, but that still applies.
Bent,
that still applies to me, though.
I'm just making a joke. Unidentified Leviathan. I'm not actually criticizing Kent here, but I will also point out that at high temperatures and under high pressure, rock undergoes plastic deformation just fine, and the idea that it doesn't is just nonsense. Here we go, more Kent.
If those were hard layers, different ages, they would have cracked when they bent. They were bent while they were soft mud, not hard rock. So the evidence is overwhelming that all those layers are the same age, and they were all formed, I think, during Noah's flood, but certainly they were all soft when they were bent. I'll get slides of that in just a second here. Anyway, was that the most important question you had, though, of all the ones?
Well, that was one of them. I guess as much I would love to see like maybe a simulation of what you just explained, because I don't think you touched on the. I don't have a problem with mountains buckling, but between divergent plates, there was nothing to cause them to buckle. So maybe a simulation of what you were explaining would maybe get me to conceptualize what you're talking about. Another thing I was talking about is like you find preserved trackways and raindrops and animal burrows.
That's a fair question. Fair question.
It's a very fair question, Kent. I want to hear what you have to say.
During the flood in the days of Noah, parts of the earth would be covered and other parts may be uncovered. Noah's in the ark for a year, according to Genesis 6, 7, and 8. So the fact that he's in the ark for a year does not mean the whole earth is covered for a year. Part of it might only have been covered for a few weeks. How long would it take to drown everybody? A few hours. Okay. So the crust of the earth was flexing up and down.
Okay, so hold on. How long would it take to drown everybody? A few hours. Okay, so Kent is imagining that in a flood that killed literally everything land-based that wasn't in the ark, after a few hours there was some dry land on which some already dead dinosaurs went up onto land, laid some eggs, then died, and were subsequently covered by more water. So we have zombie egg-laying dinosaurs. That's the real answer that Kent Hovind just gave.
That is a simulation that I want to see. I would totally watch that movie.
Oh my goodness. That is possibly the stupidest thing that I have ever heard in my entire life. Holy crap. Oh, let's keep going.
Like it does today,
man.
a little bit. Just the tide, just the Earth turning under the moon, not only causes a water tide, which we can all see, folks in the Caribbean know about that, but also causes a land tide. Actually, Alabama lifts up a couple of inches just by every time we go under the moon.
I'm going to be honest. I don't know if Alabama goes up a couple inches with the moon. So maybe. That might be true. I don't know. I'm probably not going to investigate it. And unidentified Leviathan, please tell me what Kent actually meant there, because what it feels like he meant is just so stupid that I can't even comprehend it. And yeah, unidentified Leviathan says, "Sweet home Alabama." Yeah. Let's keep going.
If the cracks, if the Earth has cracks in it, it's more likely to happen as an earthquake or something when that land is flexing up and down. That's when it's more likely to break loose. Haha. I think I found my slide. Okay.
I agree with Kent there. So, not all fault lines are actually faults between tectonic plates. And the first time I ever experienced a earthquake, I was in Massachusetts, which is not near any tectonic plate, boundaries. But there is a fault there, which is a result of the Earth buckling up after the retreat of the glaciers from the last ice age. And there are occasional earthquakes in Massachusetts. And I was watching Paranormal Activity, and the earthquake happened to coincide with the scene where the girl from Paranormal Activity was being dragged out of the bedroom into the, balcony area. And then suddenly, as that was happening, the entire ground around me started shaking, and I thought to myself, oh shit, the demon is real, I'm screwed, oh my god, I'm gonna die. And
That's
then,
amazing.
then the slightly more rational part of my brain took over, and I was like, maybe that was just a regular old earthquake. And I checked the news, and sure enough, it was an earthquake. But for a minute or so there, I thought that the demon had come out of my TV and was gonna freaking kill me.
Oh, that's amazing.
It was pretty great. In retrospect, at the time, it was the most horrifying thing that had ever happened to me. And yeah, look, Unidentified Leviathan says demons can't do that. Well, you know what? You wait till you're in an earthquake. At the exact moment, the demon starts grabbing some girl from bed in the movie. Because, wow, was that scary.
That's a pretty realistic movie.
Yeah. Okay, here's more Kent.
Yeah, sorry about that. So raindrops and things would be preserved if a section of the Earth lifted up during the flood and was exposed for a few weeks. Raindrops could be there, and then it could sink back down and new layers go on top. It would all
So in the course of a few weeks, raindrops are going to harden out to the point that subsequent aqueous layers of sediments aren't going to replace them. And remember, these sediments are coming in at 90 miles an hour, according to you, Kent. And that's not going to cause any problems for these raindrop preservations that have only had a couple days to harden. Oh, remember when you said we should keep this to under 2 hours, Bent?
Yeah, I do.
I feel like that isn't a realistic thing if we're going to get through this video. So I'm going to have to ask the chat whether or not you'd like to keep it under 2 hours per Bent's request, or you'd like to finish the video, because those aren't going to both happen.
depend on how violent it was at that spot at that time. Like I mentioned, there are parts of the Earth right now today that are experiencing incredible violence. Hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes. I don't feel a thing here in Lennox. And there are times when we have violence right here, and they don't feel a thing in China. So I think you're confusing and thinking that the whole Earth is a catastrophe at the same time. Noah was in the ark for a year. The world was destroyed. Thousands of sediment layers were laid down. And just the tidal change during the flood would lay down hundreds of layers of sediment. You certainly get at least one.
Yeah, Kent, requiring worldwide violent sedimentation. Oh my goodness. Oh.
On every tidal change, every 6 hours and 12 minutes. I didn't do the math on how many 6 hours and 12 minutes there are in a year, but it's a lot. So it'd be
What
somewhere
is
around
happening with the video? Was that in the original video?
12,000? No. 365 times 4. Right?
Yeah.
A lot.
Also, Bent, the chat is going
1,300.
against you.
So I
in
think we
terms
find
ending
layers
it
of the
at
Earth
2 hours,
deposited very rapidly.
Well, the
Just
chat
every few hours.
can
Plus,
get
with the
bent
sideways movement of the
for
water,
longer than
you would get
bent
real
time.
rapid
Get it.
deposition and then reshuffling. There are several
Also-
different kinds of rocks in the world. Of course, there's sedimentary rock, igneous.
I have to be right back due to alcohol. So, Bent, say amusing things and also shill your band.
Okay. I got nothing amusing to say, but there will be music released in the next 3 weeks or so, and the Dapper Dinosaur will link it. And then we can all rock on while we watch Kent with Bent 6. I forget what that one's going to be called. Let me check here, because I have it written down. I think Kent with Bent 6 is going to be called Resurrection. Just wait for Kent with Bent 8. The name of that one is going to be awesome.
I feel like you're still not saying anything, but whatever, I'm back.
Oh, I said stuff.
Okay, and Illuminati on it says, I'm sorry, but Kent doesn't know much about dinosaurs. He doesn't even know what a dinosaur is. Kent couldn't identify the skeleton of a dinosaur as such when presented with one, as he admitted in my debate. So... Oh, Mr. Sirius is here right on time, except an hour and 30 late, but that's okay.
Rock, metamorphic rock. But I think it's all much easier to explain by Noah's flood. Did it all. Now, the difference, Mike, I cannot prove the flood story is true.
No, you can't. But I can prove it's not true. So, you know. Or at least I can prove his version isn't true. Blood Slaughter's here! Ahoy hoy, Blood Slaughter! Man, so what I'm guessing is that Steve's stream stopped because Steve started streaming at 6, and he was not planning that as early as I planned this, so I blame Steve. Whatever, it doesn't matter. Go subscribe to Steve McRae.
Yeah, if you haven't subscribed to Steve McRae, what is wrong with you?
Exactly.
The only reason I could think you hadn't is if you're Kyle, and if you're Kyle, you're not welcome here.
That's true. If anyone here is Kyle Curtis, just go away and unsubscribe. And unidentified Leviathan, I appreciate that you subscribe to Steve McRae because I know that he and you would disagree on a lot. But you seem like a really great guy who is open to listening to opposing opinions, and I honestly appreciate that. I cannot say how much I appreciate that Unidentified Leviathan disagrees with me, but that he is cordial about it and continues to watch my stuff.
I'm going to second that.
So, he is how I wish most creationists were, but they aren't, in my experience. Here comes more Kent.
I don't think anything about the flood story has ever been proven wrong, but
I mean, except for almost everything, but okay.
Cannot prove that it's true. And I'm not asking everybody to pay for my theory to be taught in the schools. You guys are demanding that everybody pay for your religion of evolution.
You know, it's weird because I was just demanding that evolution is taught in schools just the other day.
So here...
Oh, wait, no, I wasn't.
The thing that I hate most about this argument is that no matter what the status is of public schools or anything, right? The science would remain the same. The evidence would be the same. If there were no public schools at all, and all schools were private, it wouldn't change the evidence of geology. In fact, the evidence of geology that refuted the global flood was collected before there were public schools. I it's just a stupid argument. It's just an appeal to emotion, and I hate it.
Taught in the schools at taxpayer expense. I think that's grossly unfair at the minimum, okay?
Also, if you're not going to pay your taxes, I don't want to hear about your complaints about taxpayer expense.
Yeah, Kent, this time it's personal.
Not saying anything about how much I agree. Oh, excuse me. Agree or disagree with Kent's incarceration or his stance on taxes. But if you're not going to pay them, you don't get to complain about what they're used for. That's like complaining to me about how I spent a bunch of money on booze and a food processor and pineapple juice and coconut cream so I could make pina coladas for this weekend because gosh darn it, I'm sitting in my pool and drinking pina coladas over this holiday weekend. And if any of you jerks think you can stop me, you're wrong. And that includes the management company at my apartment. So take that, Kent. Also, the management company.
If you want to believe in evolution, great. If you want to believe those layers are different ages, I don't care what you believe. But it's not part of science. And it's not should not be forced on everybody to learn that as an exclusive monopoly on one particular religion getting tax funding. I think that's grossly unfair. As far as how the Caribbean islands formed, I think it's obvious most of the islands would be formed during Noah's flood. If you lowered the oceans right now, just lower the ocean, I don't know how much, a couple hundred feet from here to the stop sign. If you lower the ocean a few hundred feet, the Caribbean islands are not islands anymore. They're part of South America or North America, whichever way you want to go. You guys didn't vote on that. But if you the Indonesian archipelago.
Yep. Yeah, he did.
There, it's only like 30 feet deep.
Oh, are you muted?
Most of that is 30. That's the width of this room.
I was muted, and I asked, did he just say archipelago? And that's some context. And I'm apparently too far into this to figure out whether I'm muted or not.
Well, that's what I'm here for.
Also, Unidentified Leviathan asked a question about Ceratosaurus being able to swim. So basically, anything can swim. Virtually all animals can get themselves out of at least a calm water situation. Some animals are better at swimming than others, but I don't know of any animal that literally can't swim that isn't already sessile, and therefore, by virtue of being sessile, aquatic, and doesn't need to swim. So, okay, let's keep going.
30 feet. That during World War II, they couldn't even get submarines in and out of there because you couldn't hide them. You can't get deep enough to hide. Where's that sub? Oh, right there. So this is a problem. Between England and France, the water is only 130 feet deep, I believe, at the deepest point. 130 feet.
Sure.
That's from here to the street. So that's the deepest point. So the oceans today average 12,000 feet deep. If you lowered the oceans just 300 feet, to pick a number, which is what point? Way less than 1%. Lower the oceans down 300 feet out of 12,000. All the continents become connected. So hang on. Here's what the crust of the Earth looks like. Slide number 53. Alt DV 52. There. This is grossly exaggerated height on the mountains called vertical exaggeration. Map makers have to do that. Globe makers.
Okay, so Illuminati Dawn might have just won the chat awesomeness award that I just made up right now. Because he says, I bet Halskaraptor could swim pretty well, or something like that, because now there's a bunch of chats. But Halskaraptor is a dromaeosaur, which is the family of animals that includes like Velociraptor and Utahraptor and Deinonychus and whatnot. And Halskaraptor is basically a Mesozoic duck that's actually a raptor. And it's freaking amazing, and you should all go look it up. And feel like I missed something. Xenos Carthage says, but which 440k race is the best? Well, I can tell you that when I played Warhammer 40k fairly regularly, I played Dark Eldar, Nurgle, Chaos Space Marines, Nurgle Demons, Imperial Space Marines, Eldar. I think that's it. So pick one of those. So there you go, Xanos Carthage. Just pick one. Also, my Chaos Demons Orc army, where the orcs were actually a friend of mine, we were in an actual tournament in a GW store, and we won handily. So take that. Yeah.
Have to do that. You can feel the bumps on here, the Rocky Mountains. At this real scale, you couldn't feel them. Couldn't find them with a magnifying glass. They're too tiny.
I'm going to agree with Kent on that one.
But Pangea is pure baloney. These fossils are found all over the world. Same kinds of fossils. They're
Pangea is baloney. These fossils are found all over the world, exactly as Pangea would predict. Okay.
It doesn't happen. You take the water out of the oceans, you'll notice there's dirt underneath. Here you go. Caribbean islands, Puerto Rico, down here, well, a little further down. But all of this area is very shallow. Most of it is. So just lower the water a few hundred feet, freeze it, stick it on the poles. Obviously, the Earth had a time in its history when the ice caps were ginormous. The ice came all the way down to Kansas City, Missouri. I don't think anybody argues about that. So by freezing all that water, sticking it on the poles, bigger ice caps makes smaller oceans, and all what is now the islands would be, most of them, would be connected. Don't see a problem with that at all. Let's see. Get up to the right one here. Oh, here we go. Lateral compression. I'm sorry. Go ahead. What was your...
I'm sorry, Ben, did you say something?
No, that wasn't me. That was terrible microphone, emotionally stunted emoticon.
Got it.
Yeah, so in regard to the footprints, when you said that the land was flexing and there was high tides and so on, it is hard to imagine that a flood would lay down tons of sediments and then have animals, for some reason, walk on them to then preserve their footprints, even egg nests. So it seems like animals had time to build nests as well. And then they would be buried again by more sediments, but some later time in the flood. What was really going on there? How would you get up, for example, an egg nest sandwiched between layers of the flood? How would the animal have time to make a nest there?
I think the evolutionist has an even worse problem with that type of thing. Okay, how do you explain raindrops preserved in layers? How do you explain fossils at all? Animals die today by the millions, and none of them fossilize. None. The coyotes scatter them all over the woods, and the ants eat what's left. I mean, they don't. There's no examples of rapid fossilization happening now.
Okay. So here's the thing: subfossils are a real thing. A subfossil is a organic remnant of life that has started to become inorganic. So there are examples of bones that humans have recovered that are in the process of fossilization in terms of permineralization. I'm sorry, but this whiskey is way better than Kent, so you're just gonna have to deal with that. But Kent is completely wrong about this. And even if he were right that there were no examples of in-process fossilization remains, well then how does he explain the fact that all these, quote, Mesozoic dinosaurs are all completely permineralized? Because he thinks that they existed all the way from the flood till now. Well, how come none, and I mean none, of the non-avian dinosaurs have been found in non-permineralized states? Kent thinks that examples like St. George and the Dragon are examples of relatively recent dinosaur killings by humans. Find me one non-permineralized dinosaur skeleton that isn't a bird. Just one. And you know what? I'll start taking you seriously, Kent.
But yet we find fossils in the ground by the billions. Some places they're 100 feet thick, solid fossils. This had to be a royal disaster. The flood of Noah is the best way to explain fossils at all, and certainly fossil beds. And millions of times the fossils are fully articulated. All the bones are still connected. Well, that doesn't happen when an animal dies today.
Yes, it does, Kent. It doesn't happen most of the time. Which, again, corresponds to the fossil record, where most of the time bones aren't articulated. But if an animal dies today in, say, a flood, which is a thing that still happens, and then is covered in sediments, that's how we get things like, modern partially fossilized remains, which are a thing. Your ignorance of the record of recently deceased animals isn't evidence of a flood, Kent.
It gets scattered all over the place by the coyotes and the buzzards and the ants. It just doesn't happen. There are no examples of it happening anywhere, but we dig in the ground and we find fossils by the billions. So I think Noah's flood is the best way to explain that. The crust of the earth flexing up and down. Parts of the earth might have been covered for a few weeks, maybe a few months.
What about fossil beds where dozens or even in some cases hundreds of animals are found in igneous layers, Kent? Do you think there was a volcano that just happened to preserve a whole bunch of animals of the same species in the same place at the same time in a flood where they'd already died and been scattered, and then somehow they collected in the same place at the same time just by chance? Oh, maybe not. I don't know.
I don't know how long it took to kill everybody. There might have been birds building nests or reptiles building nests and laying eggs in them when the flood came, and it came up for a few minutes and went back down and said, "Woo boy, glad that's over." And then it came back and drowned them all. We'll have to watch the video when we get to heaven. And Mike, I'd like you to be there with me in heaven to watch the video. So, okay?
They have VCRs in
In
heaven.
regards to
Just so you know.
animals being fossil,
Sorry, say that again, man?
They have VCRs in heaven, so you can watch the video with.
Oh, that makes sense.
there are many different dynamics that can actually fossilize an animal without recourse to a global flood. For example, in Trinidad, there are tar lakes and so on where animals would just fall into the tar lake and they would just fall in there and they would fossilize that way. You actually find fossils when you dig for oil and so on because animals would fall into the tar lake. Animals could get lodged in quicksand, they can be covered by sandstorms, they can be covered in flash floods.
Now you're onto something.
Whatever, they can be covered by volcanic ash or just engulfed by volcanoes, volcanic eruptions and so on. So there are many dynamics in which an animal can be fossilized. And in fact, you can actually
Hey, he's saying what I said.
study I think it's a taxonomy or something, of how an animal was buried and so on. In regards to the egg nest, I see you straight apart from it. Instead of answering the question, you diverged and said that evolution's had a problem with explaining that. No, evolutions don't have a problem with explaining footprints and so on, because what would happen is you can have an animal walk in some kind of muddy environment, this sappy environment, and then it would dry off, and then new sediments would be deposited on top of it. I don't see how, in go to flood though, how you'd have time for an animal to build a nest to then be later covered by more sediments.
Well, and if that's enough of a question in your mind to reject the whole story, I mean, you got to answer to God for that. But I don't see a problem with nests and everything else being destroyed.
Yeah, God is going to burn you forever if you use reason to think about the fossil record. Kent Hovind, 2019.
Are covered. Again, it might have been the very first thing at the beginning of the flood this happened. If it's on top of sedimentary layers, you are right. If a nest is found...
Wait, the nests were the first thing that happened in the flood? Then why do they occur at various levels in these quote-unquote flood strata, Kent? Nothing you're saying actually makes sense. You're relying on your viewers being absolute morons who've never read anything about anything. Unfortunately, such people exist and agree with you.
Fossilized on top of sediment layers, we would assume this thing was built in the middle of the flood. Well, again, let's give the flood a year, like the Bible says. And if parts of the earth where that nest, we find a nest in China, underneath are layers of sediment, on top are layers of sediment. Oh, well, then this area must have been exposed for a few months, maybe even 6 months, long enough for birds to mate and lay their eggs. I mean, that only takes a few months. And so I don't see there's a problem.
Wait, birds are mating and laying eggs in the middle of a global flood where there are 90 miles an hour sediment layers being deposited everywhere, including the places where you're talking about, Kent, since they're in the middle of the fossil record. What? This is stupid enough that I might not even finish the whole video, and I might just stop it early.
Oh, it's gonna finish. That's what the chat wants.
Chat, remind me if that's what you want. Because if you don't remind me...
Problem. Animals would be searching for high ground. As the high ground gets smaller and smaller, they'd be running all over the place trying to find, ground becomes expensive real estate. Today, only 30% of the earth is above sea level, 29%. The rest is below sea level right now today. And only 3% of the earth today is habitable. But when they got to the top of Mount Everest in 1953, they found fossilized clams. They get to the top of the mountains in Peru and find 11-foot oyster shells. And oftentimes the clam...
Okay. I'm currently angry. These 11... hold on 1 second. I had to put my drink away from me so I don't spill it. Okay. These 11-foot effing clamshells aren't even fossils. They are concretions of sediment that are inorganic. Plus, these frickin' clamshells, Kent, that you think are at the top of Mount Everest aren't even clams. They are an entirely different phylum from clams. And when you're like, oh, clams don't die in the open or in the closed position, but these things died in the closed position. You know what? Yeah, that's true. Because they weren't clams. They were brachiopods. And brachiopods die in the closed position because they have an entirely different anatomy. So different that they're not in the same phylum as clams. You couldn't get an organism less closely related to a clam than a brachiopod if you frickin' tried, Kent. Okay.
This time, it's personal.
Yeah, seriously. I'm bringing my drink back towards me. I feel better now, having yelled. And yes, brachiopods and clams both live in the water.
Are closed. We've got thousands of them here in our museum. Petrified clams in the closed position.
Kent, you, from just seeing that poor image, have a collection of bivalves, which are mollusks, and brachiopods, which I can also see, which are entirely different phyla.
Had to be buried alive. The clam got buried in mud layers, couldn't even open, died, and fossilized. Fossilization doesn't happen, as far as I'm aware, anywhere. You might find a rare example. Now, fossilizing something in tar is a little different, or fossilizing it in quicksand or in ash or sandstorms. You are right. Those are different types of fossils. But I think you'll find most of the fossils that exist in the planet and museums all over the world were in sedimentary layers of mud. This isn't formed in ash. This isn't formed...
Yeah, sedimentary layers are mostly, laid down in water. But they aren't all laid down in water. There are many sedimentary layers that are laid down by wind. Like, I don't know, one of the most famous fossils ever is the battling velociraptor and protoceratops. That's an Aeolian sandstone deposit, Kent. That happened when a velociraptor and a protoceratops were locked in combat and a sand dune collapsed on them in a frickin' desert. And you know what? I live and mostly work in deserts. And I'm just gonna have to say that desert-borne sediments versus flood-borne sediments, not the same thing.
in tar. They can tell the difference of how it formed by look at the fossil under a magnifying glass. So you're right, there are different ways it can happen. But Mount Everest is a little ways from the beach, like 450 miles. Why would they have clams on top of Mount Everest?
Because before it was uplifted, which you admit happened, Kent, you already admitted in this debate that uplift of the Himalayan mountains happened. Both sides of the Himalayan were at a beach. Otherwise, the uplift wouldn't have happened because the two continental plates wouldn't have collided with each other. So it's absolutely trivial as to why marine sediments would be up high in the Himalayan mountains. I might die from stupid tonight. And if I do, please tell my family that they're pretty cool.
You had a good run. 100 million years is pretty good.
It is pretty good.
The flood model is very simple. Mount Everest wasn't there until after the flood. Probably during the last part of the flood, the mountains lifted up, like the Bible says in Psalm 104.
Why? You haven't told us how any of this makes sense in terms of a sequence, Kent. But hey, whatever.
There's a clam bed here's fossilized eggs right here.
I'm sorry, did you say something, Bent?
That wasn't me. That was emotionally stunted emoticon. We both have equally bad microphones, I guess.
Apparently.
That would happen in a flood.
Right, but it would be strange as to how the animals would have time to.
We just have a couple of minutes left for the discussion portion. So if there's any questions that you feel like you really want to get out, now would be the time. Go ahead, gentlemen.
Let me see. Go ahead.
You mentioned about the standing for truth accepts Pangea. I object to the word accept. They can believe in Pangea. You can only accept something that is proven to be true. The fact that the continents seem to fit, like
so
South America and Africa seem to fit, that's a pure coincidence based on the water level. This building and my house would fit too. They're 100 feet apart. But
I like how Ken says, oh, the fact that South America and Africa fits together is a coincidence. Just like the fact that my building would fit with the next over building across the street. You know what, Kent? Humans use 90-degree angles. And the fact that your street is on a particular angle means that any two buildings on opposite sides of that street would fit together is not a stochastic event that's just, ooh, that's a coincidence. No, it was planned by humans. But I don't know if you noticed, but the coastlines of Africa and South America aren't laid out on 90-degree angles, and they aren't predictable in terms of lining up by just like, oh, stochastically that would just kind of happen. Your disanalogy, Kent, is not a refutation. Anything to add, Bent? I think Bent might have died of stupid. So we'll keep going.
I was muted. I don't have anything to add, no.
Okay.
prove the Earth broke apart and they slid to where they are. It's just a coincidence. The shape of Africa and the shape of South America is a pure coincidence based on the water level. Raise or lower the water a few hundred feet, all that changes. I mean, that's common sense 101. Go ahead.
Common sense 101.
But it's not just based on the shape of the continent alone. We are aware of how continents would look when they collide, just like the Himalayas and so on. They would share strata and they would share fauna and so on. So the biostratigraphy and the stratigraphy of the mountains themselves
Okay, emotionally essential monochrome brings up a good point, which is biostratigraphy is harder to explain from a creationist standpoint than just stratigraphy. And you know what? I don't think Kent or anyone else has a good explanation for biostratigraphy, which is a ridiculously hard word to say. Well, whatever.
On the American side and the African plates and the European plates, they correlate. So that's where the idea came from, that they were together. But you'd have to take that argument up with Stan the truth, because he's the one making the argument. I'd like to know if do I take your word on it, that Pangea wasn't a thing, or do I take the consensus of other creationists who usually do argue that Pangea, or at least the continents wasn't a thing?
Right, you should take my word on it. I'm right, they're wrong.
All right. Oh, okay.
No problem. Call me anytime. I'll be glad to help.
All right. Let me see. I have one more thing in regards to.
We got 30 seconds. We got 30 seconds, so ask away. Ask away.
wait a second. It would be in regards to fossilized coral reefs. For example, the Guadalupe Mountains in Texas, a large fossilized coral reef. It's about 2,000 feet thick. How do you get all that coral to accumulate under a young Earth model?
Well, there's coral reefs accumulating today that are huge. I mean, coral can grow within a certain effective distance of the surface of the water. I'm not sure what it is, probably different for different species. But off the coast of Australia right now, the coral reef is huge. I mean, really huge. I've been scuba diving on it. It's beautiful. But coral during the pre-flood world would grow like crazy. I think there were a lot smaller oceans and a lot more land. But during the flood, these giant coral reefs growing under a perfect...
Coral in the pre-flood world would grow like crazy. For what reason? And since you basically say that the entire Phanerozoic is flood strata, Kent, it doesn't matter how fast pre-flood coral grow, because you wouldn't get any fossil coral in that Phanerozoic period that would have grown at that crazy rapid rate. So even when you say that, sure, fossil coral, maybe it grew at 10 trillion times the rate of modern coral before the flood, it doesn't matter. Because according to you, Kent, we don't have any pre-flood coral.
environment would be completely covered very quickly. I found a picture of the sediment layers that are squeezed, obviously from lateral compression. Finally, seminar part 6, if you want to watch it. If you look at these layers under a magnifying glass, they don't have hairline fractures. Where if it was hard rock and bent, it would be hairline fractures. There aren't any. I was the ones in Southern California. Got up real close with my magnifying glass on my Swiss Army knife. No hairline fractures. These were all bent while they were soft. Noah's flood would have formed all these layers in less than a year.
The fact that they're bent now does not require that they were mud or something later. It just requires that they were under high temperature and pressure, which is a thing that happens when you have lots of overlaying rock layers. So, non sequitur.
Would have bent when the continents were sliding around in probably a matter of a couple hours, and then they hardened. So do this with pottery. Get a bunch of soft layers of pottery, bend it any way you want, and then bake it. And you can have bent layers in a matter of minutes.
Oh, hey, Kent used a disanalogy to prove his point. Too bad it was a disanalogy and not an actual analogy. Wah, wah.
So, I got off track on your question. I'm sorry. You were asking about...
Right, the coral reefs. The one I'm talking about, it's actually situated in the Permian. It's on top thousands of feet of sediment, so it couldn't have been pre-flood. It's actually a post-flood syndrome.
First of all, I don't think there's any such thing as a Permian layer. I don't think there's no such thing as a Jurassic or Cambrian or Permian. The whole thing's a bunch of baloney. But
okay, Kent, here's the thing. The names of these layers aren't... Okay, the names themselves are arbitrary, but these orders aren't. It is simply undeniable, if you look at the actual fossils, that faunal succession is a thing. Oh, crap, I just dropped my, whiskey. Hold on a second.
That is not cool.
Well, I have tiny arms. What do you want from me?
Better control of your tiny arms.
Well, tiny arms plus drunkenness, plus I don't even have lips, so get wrecked. Also, what was I talking about?
You were talking about Kent's statements against the Jurassic era and all that stuff.
Oh, right. So here's the thing, right? Like, the faunal succession between these layers is objective. There are certain layers that are Paleozoic, and they only contain things like trilobites and gorgonopsids and things like that. And then there are Mesozoic layers that contain dinosaurs and pterosaurs and actual mammals. And then there are Cenozoic layers that only contain things like more recent things like placental mammals and you know, phosphorasids and things like that. This isn't just an illusion. And pretending that it is doesn't help you explain anything, Kent. And this succession of fauna in the fossil record, this faunal succession, doesn't follow rules of hydrodynamic sorting. So, and Illuminati Dawn, yes, it is alcohol abuse that I dropped my whiskey. But luckily, I didn't spill any drops. So, there you go.
During the flood, you can get crusts of the earth sliding over each other. We have that today. In an earthquake, a section of ground can slide over another section. That's not a problem. It happens all the time. Overthrust, it's called.
Okay, gentlemen. Well, thank you so much for that lively discussion. That certainly flew by. We're going to jump right into the concluding statements then. Emotionally stunning Monica, since you started, you can go next, and then we will end with Dr. Hovind.
All right. So again, I guess thanks for the discussion. In regards to my questions, further stratified mountain ranges between divergent plates, although we did answer how mountains are formed when they collide and when they are compressed. There's no compression between divergent plates. This is a mountain between divergent plates is explained under the uniformitarian model because the continents were once separated, then they combined independently, then they separated again. So when they combined, they collided, and then you get those mountain ranges. I'm not seeing how that forms under a creation model, especially when you check Pangea, or at least the continents were once together. Again, no real explanation for how you can get egg nests, and these egg nests are found right through the fossil record. That would mean that the flood, for some reason, that every time it laid down some layers, it receded for a couple months to have birds and reptiles and all that make their nests and so on, and then cover them again, and then the next layer would have them, and then the next layer, because they're found right through the fossil record. They're abundant in the fossil record. Let me see. The Appalachian Mountain Range, it's not a thrust fault. It's actually sitting on top of the layers. It's not thrusted. You can actually study how it got there. It's not thrusted. It's a large mountain range with forms like a mountain range of coral. It would be nice to know when it formed and how it's lifted thousands of feet above sea level. How did it form in that short space of time during the flood? What else? What did I touch on? Something I wanted to touch on is because Ken Hovind talks about the seas could have been calmed. However, he does argue that the flood ejected material that caused the craters on the moon and so on, and also caused the craters on Earth. I'd like to know what the Earth was like during that heavy bombardment of debris and so on. If they were able to cause these large craters like the one in Arizona, then they would have been very destructive things. I'd like to know what the world was like during the time these things were bombarding the Earth. Yeah.
Is that it there, Emotion?
Do I have more time?
It says you got 2 minutes left, but we can certainly end there. And
I have 2 minutes left. Let me see. What other points? Oh, okay. What other point? I thought I just had to just close. Let me see. Let me see here. The arrangement of fossils in the fossil record. We have no explanation as to why we don't find any plant life and so on in the Cambrian, or any crabs and so on in the Cambrian. Because the Cambrian there were land in the Cambrian, there were continents in the Cambrian, but there's no any trace of any complex life on land in the Cambrian, especially when our creationists argue that things were sometimes buried where they stood. We find no trees there, and it would be nice for creationists to explain why we don't find trees in the Cambrian. So I think I will close off with that, and then have them close off.
Okay, well, thank you there, Mike. We can jump right into Dr. Hovind for your 5-minute concluding statement. Go ahead.
Well, thank you, sir. First of all, Mike, thanks for doing this. Keep studying. You can be a Baptist like me someday, by the time you learn all the truth. God made the world in 6 days.
You are muted right now.
Okay, Baptists are not the be-all and end-all for Christian truth, no matter who you are.
Just like he said he did. That's the only way that works. I mean, so many plants and animals depend upon each other, symbiotic relationships, reciprocating the gases, etc. It doesn't work with a slow, gradual development of evolution, and there's no evidence of any animal or plant ever producing anything other than its kind. No examples. Dogs produce dogs, period. No exceptions. So I think evolution is a completely silly religion, but people like it because it gets rid of God. The Bible says in Psalm 62, they consult to cast him down from his excellency, talking about get God off his throne and get rid of his book. They delight in lies. There are 70-some lies in the typical textbook that are used as evidence for evolution. They're going to tell you the Grand Canyon was made by the Colorado River. That's a lie, not true. They're going to tell you there's a fossil record. That's a lie. There is no fossil record. There's a lot of fossils, but none of them talk. And it's not a record. They're making it up. We've got evidence from the fossil. No fossils could possibly count as evidence for evolution. None. When you find a fossil, all you know is it died. You can't.
Okay, here's the thing that I really hate about Kent. It's that despite having been shown conclusively that he's wrong, he continues to repeat the same errors. And this is one of them. I have proven to him, and he didn't object. That's not all you can know from a fossil. It might not be as much as he would want from a fossil that you can know, but he knows he's wrong here. And that's why I consider him to be a con artist. He is a thoroughly dishonest speaker.
Prove it had any children. And adding time is not going to help. Billions of years would not help turn your amoeba to a whale. Adding energy won't help. They added a bunch of energy at Hiroshima. Didn't solve a thing. And the present is not the key to the past. These are some of the lies in my textbook. Mike, there is no geologic column. It doesn't exist, except in the textbooks. It's imagination. There are no index fossils. None. Index fossils. No such thing. The fossils are going to automatically be sorted based upon their body density or based upon when they died. The clams would be the first ones buried. They're already at the bottom. Birds would be the last ones buried. They fly around till they run out of gas.
Yeah, but it doesn't explain why you have clams and birds in the same freaking sediments, Kent, from recent... Oh my god, I'm gonna die.
Nothing
This
to do with
time it's
evolution. One of the
personal.
lies in the text.
Sorry, say that again?
This time it's personal.
Seriously.
Book. There is no geologic column. I'm sorry, son, it doesn't exist. Now, here's what happened. In the last days, Peter predicted there would be scoffers who would be walking after their own lust. Mike, I don't know you at all, but it's been my experience with, I think, all the 184 atheists I've debated now, that they've got a reason to reject God's authority in their life. They've got something in their lifestyle that they don't want God telling them to change.
Yeah, the only reason to disagree with Kent is because you like premarital sex or drugs or something. I don't know.
That's been my experience. Well, you can answer to God about that yourself. They're going to say, where's the promise of his coming? Since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were. This is uniformitarianism, the purpose of the debate. The Bible says they will make up this idea rather than believe God. It says they are willingly ignorant of the creation and how the earth was in the water, out of the water, and in the water. The original creation is critical. There was water in the crust of the earth. It came shooting to the surface. There was water above the atmosphere. It came raining down.
I'm going to talk about both of those options with astronomer and planetary scientist Landon Kirtnall in the following weeks. So stay tuned.
Cover all that on drdino.com. Just get my video series, Kent Hovind Official, as our YouTube channel, but Dr. Dino is our website. Order the seminars. They're $50 for the whole thing, 18 hours. You can watch it, record it, copy it, send it back, get your money back, minus the shipping cost. The Bible says this.
Kent, I can watch it and record it without paying any of that. So, yeah.
Scoffers will be ignorant of the flood. There's the problem. They don't want to believe there was a flood. So, Mike, I'll pray for you. I'd like to see you give your heart to the Lord, become a Christian, or anybody else watching this. The goal of our ministry is not to harm anybody. We want to help draw people to Christ. You're going to die one day.
Kent, I gotta be honest. When it comes to people I know personally, you have repelled more people from Christ than you have drawn to Christ. So, maybe reconsider.
I hope it's a long time from now, but it's going to happen. What happens next? If you are absolutely convinced that you can leave this world with a belief...
Alright, this is where Kent starts preaching, and from what I remember, the video just kind of goes downhill from there. And as a rule, I do not allow preaching on my channel because I remain religiously neutral. I have personal religious views, but that's separate from my channel. And, yeah, proselytizing for any religion or lack of religion is not something I permit on my channel. So I'm going to stop it here. I absolutely love everyone who showed up to watch this in the chat. I'm being honest, I cannot express how much I appreciate that you guys watch the trash that I put out onto the internet. So, Bent, do you have anything to plug or shill or whatever?
I did that earlier.
Do it again.
Well, I do want to make another comment that's similar to what you said a few minutes ago, and it's actually literally a quote. I believe it was Mr. Sirius. And this is when Kent was repeating the same lies he likes to repeat. I'm just going to read the quote. Kent does get corrected all the time, The fact that he hasn't taken any of those corrections to heart seems to indicate he's intellectually dishonest. And then other comments right after were like, yeah, he hits the reset switch after every debate. Like, he says something that he knows is wrong. It's proven to him that it's wrong. And then he just hits the reset button for his next debate and continues spreading lies. And it's pretty obvious, even for stupid people like me, to see right through that. It's like the great Mike Stoklasa says, you might not notice, but your brain does. Subconsciously, people notice. Consciously, smarter people notice, but people notice, and they can tell that he is a con artist. And wait a couple weeks till that Copper Magma music is out. Promise you'll love it, or that you should love it. One of those two things are true.
All right, and I agree. Check for Copper Magma music, because I've heard some of it, and what I've heard is really good. Please share this video with your friends, and I know it sounds phony, because it always does, but I sincerely appreciate every single one of you who was here in the chat tonight, including apparently the only one of you who disagrees with me, which is Unidentified Leviathan, whom I appreciate to a degree that none of you will believe. So don't even question it. Don't even question me on it. But yeah, it is time for me to say goodnight. And please subscribe if you haven't. If you have, share this with your friends. Share my scripted videos with them. And in terms of announcements, I'm going to be doing a collaboration with FTFE / Fight the Flat Earth. We're going to be doing a Young Earth Creationism video. I've already sent him the video, so we're going to be working on that. I'm going to be doing an interview with Landon Kurt Knoll, who is an astronomer and a planetary scientist, and he is a frickin' genius on a level that I can't even comprehend. And in between all that, I'm also going to be working on a response video to an Ian Juby video, because Ian Juby is at least as much of a low sincerity or whatever person as Kent Hovind. And I will drive carefully, blood slaughter, so hopefully I won't die tomorrow. But I'm going to be ending the stream. Thank you for watching so much, and stay safe out there. Bent, any closing words?
Let's not forget that Landon is also a world-class mathematician, and I don't use that term lightly.
True.
So, yeah, that's going to be really awesome. I can't wait for that.
All right. Good night.